Welcome to the webinar this afternoon. We are so glad to have you joining us today. I can see that you are starting to file in, so we'll give you a few seconds in order to settle into your seat and get ready for the webinar today. The webinar is Building and Sustaining an Effective and Diverse Workforce. We'll get started momentarily. Well, we're glad to have you for this webinar. We're excited for you to join. We have an incredible guest presenter today who I'm looking forward to introducing. Before we get to that point, I would like to go over the agenda and some order of business. So Laurie, if you can take us to the second slide, we'll start with the agenda today. We'll do some introductions. That will be about 5 minutes. Laurie will have about 45 minutes for presentation, and then we anticipate having a Q&A at the end. If you do have questions throughout, we invite you to use the chat functionality. At the bottom of your Zoom screen, there is a chat icon. You'll see that George Dayton has entered a welcome everyone message, and that's right where we would invite you to submit your questions and your comments. I will be keeping track of those and making sure that we do those at the end. Now, Eluma, we're sponsoring this webinar. We really believe in the community that supports students with special needs. And we love doing these. We love the community. My name is Jeremy Glauser. I'm the CEO and the founder of Eluma, and it's a privilege to be part of this. And we provide therapy management software as well as live services online with dedicated therapists. We've been doing this for over 10 years now. I got to stop saying 10 years. It's been over 10 years and work with just surpassed 29,000 students served in 36 states. We invite you to be part of the conversation. Follow us on Twitter at Eluma Solutions. And we have a lot of webinars coming up. We'll be excited to share the next one at the end of this presentation today. Let's talk about some of the learning objectives. We hope that from this webinar, you're able to gain a stronger perspective of the workforce. It's okay. If you can go back one, then I think we're good. But we're really hoping that as the nation continues to face the educator shortage issues, Laurie's webinar today will be able to discuss how to move your system from information to implementation. Some very practical information today that Laurie's going to share with us. So I hope that you take good notes. Through the presentation, we also hope that you'll gain strategies, innovative practices, exemplar models, funding flexibilities, and supporting resources will be shared. So we can all make a difference collectively. We will record this. A link will be shared along with the slide deck and a certificate of attendance after the webinar. So look for those by email as late as early next week. And last but not least, I want to introduce Laurie. Honestly, I consider Laurie a friend and a mentor and an inspiration. Laurie has spent an entire professional career dedicated to championing the needs of students with disabilities at all levels of education, and currently is serving as a co-director with at CEC. I almost said OSEP, but that's not true. But is dedicating her time and energies at CEC, which is the Council for Exceptional Children, and previously has done a lot of incredible things, but served as director of the Office of Special Education Programs, that is OSEP, and did some great work there. Served as president of CEC and CASE, the Council of Administrators of Special Education. Has served as a special education director for Kent ISD in Michigan, spent many years as a teacher, a special education teacher, an adjunct professor at Grand Valley State University, and administration for administration program. and has a child with special needs. I first met Laurie probably 6 or so years ago at a conference, and was very generous with her time, her energy, a larger than life personality, very, very dedicated to the field. I am excited to learn today from what you have to share, and I hope all of you will take good notes and ask good questions, because we're really in for a treat. Laurie, thank you for being with us. Take it away.
All right, thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, eLuma, for an opportunity to be here with you guys today and share some strategies that we hope will help us mitigate the issue of the workforce issue. So Jeremy went through a couple of the objectives already. We want to really talk about diversifying the workforce, but how are we going to effectively attract and prepare, and then certainly retain the personnel for long term. And so today I hope to share with you some short-term, some intermediate, and some more long-term innovative strategies and solutions that will help us build a sustainable system that will promote and support an effective workforce. And right now we have a lot of options in place that I look at as Band-Aids. And I hope that over time we're able to remove those Band-Aids and actually say that we've got a very strong, sustainable system that is going to be able to attract the workforce that our children deserve. So one of my mottos with this project is really helping us move from information to implementation. So we'll go through a lot of the implementation strategies. I want to start off first by letting you know that the U.S. Department of Ed has added a definition of educator. It includes early childhood educators, teachers, principals, other school leaders, the specialized instructional support personnel, and CEC is well aligned to this definition. So when we talk about educator shortage, it's inclusive of all of these groups, because it takes all of these groups to really make a difference for the lives of our children. So just some real quick statistics. I don't want to spend too much time on these because I want to get into the innovative practices, but these are actually statistics from 2021. 66% of all teachers consider leaving the teaching profession. That's a pretty high percent. 36.4% of the teachers do leave their jobs. That's even more critical. 41.3% of all new teachers leave the teaching profession within the first 5 years. 36.8% of new teachers leave in 4 years. 28.4% leave in the first 3 years, 23% in 2 years, 11.9% in 1 year. So 15% of the overall teacher workforce leave the profession each year. That's a cost of the teacher turnover to school districts around $2.2 billion a year. It's costing us in order to bring in the people that we need to have. Teacher burnout rates are 50% higher in the Title I or the low-income schools. Schools that serve primarily students of color, the teacher turnover is 70% higher than average. We're going to talk a lot about this in a little bit, but the number one reason for teacher burnout was dissatisfaction, and that's at about 55%. Many feel it's the low salary, but it's actually dissatisfaction with the working conditions and the working culture. Family resource or personnel reasons come in second with almost about 45%. That was certainly exacerbated by the pandemic, with parents that were educators trying to balance the education of their own children at home. Despite the low pay, financial reasons were the last reason teachers leave about 17% of the time. And of those generally dissatisfied, 25% were unhappy with the standardized testing procedures, which we are well aware of. We also had a recent Ed Week survey, positions that locals are struggling to fill. 77% said that they were having difficulty recruiting substitute teachers. 55% have difficulty with paraeducators, 48% with full-time teachers, 19% with mental health coordinators and counselors, 5% with principals or assistant principals, and 3% at the district level. So if you just look at the top three between the full-time teacher, the paraeducator, and the substitute teacher, those percentages are a little disheartening. I just want to go through this really quickly because I think it's important for us to be honest about what are the barriers to us effectively attracting and preparing and retaining an effective workforce and a diverse workforce, and then how do we mitigate these issues. So I'm going to go through these really quickly, and then we'll talk about how we mitigate those. So we know that this has been a long-term issue. Decades and decades, we have been experiencing a shortage in the special education workforce, but we also know that the pandemic has created a unique set of inequities and challenges for the special educators and the early interventionists. So we have very high attrition rates. We have accelerated retirement rates. Layoffs during the pandemic created a great impact on our BIPOC students and certainly our students from low-income families. And those layoffs or those cuts contributed to the decrease in enrollment in our pre-service programs. Our pre-service programs are programs that prepare our future teachers or future special education personnel. Also inadequate support, strain on their own physical and mental health, increased stress due to working conditions. 45% of principals report inadequate working conditions, accelerating plans to leave the profession. Many teachers felt that they were ill-prepared to teach in the virtual or hybrid model. Again, low salaries, high debt. The high college debt is very detrimental. Challenges with effectively implementing IDEA for individual students. The overall impact of the learning loss that they're facing and how they recoup that and bridge those gaps. We know that there are state policies on certification and licensure that are a real barrier to us being able to change the system and move us forward in a positive way. Negative media coverage, lack of opportunity to collaborate with general education peers, especially around lesson planning, all have exacerbated the pandemic issue. So a few of the federal priorities that have come out of the U.S. Department of Ed, you'll see really addressing the COVID inequity, but very much supporting a diverse educator workforce. Professional growth, we're going to talk about that a little bit, and then strengthening some cross-agency relationships and collaboration. And CEC does have a webinar series coming up. I hope to talk to you about that at the very end. That's bringing in about 12 national organizations to help us collaborate around this issue. So Secretary Cardona came out a week or so ago with some of his priorities, and you can see that it's to support students through the pandemic. And then look at the opportunities and the achievement gaps. But I bolded the one of the last bullets, and it says investing in, recruiting, and supporting the professional development of a diverse educator workforce, including special education teachers, paraprofessionals, bilingual educators, are the ones that we're really targeting. So here again, the U.S. Department of Ed is giving us permission to prioritize our time and certainly some of the funding flexibilities around that. So speaking of funding flexibilities, let's talk about what those possibilities are. And I'm not going to spend much time on that because we do have some documents that are out there and we'd be happy to follow up with you a little bit more. But more than 280 billion have been allocated in COVID-related stimulus funds that have been distributed to mitigate the impact of the pandemic and actually have been used or are to be used to address the longstanding educator shortage issue. We've had some increases in IDA, both Part B and Part C, but certainly the Part D, which is the personnel preparation, and we're very excited about that. And the funds can be spent on anything allowable under the major education laws, including personnel and professional development. And you'll hear me talk about that a little bit more as well. But the use of the American Rescue Plan funds, certainly the academic instructional loss, some enrichment programs, mental health support, after-school programming and tutoring, and again, supporting the educator shortage. I just want to stop here and say for a minute, when we look at being able to appropriately address the instructional loss or having some summer learning opportunities, having access to mental health personnel within the school systems or tutoring options, none of that is going to be able to take place unless we've got an effective workforce in place to be able to address all of those issues above. So for us right now, mitigating the issue of the educator shortage is the only thing that's going to help us lever our ability to meet all of the bullets that are above. So again, the American Rescue Plan stipulates that 90% of the state's ESSER funds are allocated to the local education agencies or the LEAs through some of those subgrants. And they actually have until September 30th of 2022 or 2022 to award those funds. I invite you to, please invite yourself to the table. And if many of you know Jane West, who is one of our policy gurus from TED, our Teacher Education Division, would always say, if you're not at the table, you're most likely on the menu. We have to invite ourselves to the table to help figure out how to allocate these funds around the educator shortage issue. Many of the states in their American recovery plans are addressing the academic impact of the instructional loss. Some are addressing the social, emotional, and mental health related issues, but again, without the right personnel. So the Department of Ed has identified these as some effective strategies, and I'll talk a little bit more about those as well. Provide flexibility for retirees and licensed staff from other states. So we know that reciprocity is a huge issue for us, and it's coming up in one of the slides, but we have to work with our state departments of education to really look at lessening the requirements of the reciprocity so that we are able to move people into positions at a faster rate, and certainly those that are coming in credentialed. Support school staff well-being. We know that the students are experiencing mental health issues, but our staff are as well. And it is part of the concern that they have regarding their dissatisfaction because of some of the working conditions. So we've got to help build a community of resources for them as well. Provide some incentives, retention bonuses, loan forgiveness, service scholarships, increase some hourly pay, consolidate part-time roles. I'm going to speak to this very specifically. Our paraeducators in many of our states, they have reduced the contracts down to where they no longer would have to pay for health benefits. And so they're coming in at a minimum wage with no health benefits, and we're having a significant shortage in our paraeducators right now. So really taking a look at that. And building and maintaining a cadre of high quality substitute teachers is going to be important. And again, the increase in pay, some of the stipends would be good. Improve working conditions. We have to, again, support the well-being and the mental health, create a leader to educator, peer to educator support system, provide some other targeted incentives, for example, some ladder opportunities, so attract some career pathways, career advancements, paid apprenticeships, specialized training, bonuses for hard to fill positions, and retention bonuses. These are all identified by the U.S. Department of Ed. An IES study found that 18% of all of our public school teachers have a second job outside the school system in a school year, and that's really sad. And then certainly investing in the educator pipeline. So those are some resources that you'll have access to. I don't want to spend any time on those. That will help you, again, understand some of the flexible use of the funds. And then I encourage you to also look, there's a link at the bottom of this slide. That's the COVID-19 handbook, and it's the volume 2 that came out from the U.S. Department of Education that specifically addresses stabilizing a diverse and qualified workforce and supporting the educator and staff well-being. And they actually identified many of the exemplar models that came out of OSEP's work around the educator shortage. So please take a look at that. So let's get into some strategies around effectively attracting, preparing, and retaining a workforce. I can't emphasize enough the importance of all three of these areas. So we can't put all of our energy into the retention, plugging the bucket so that we don't lose the current qualified staff that we have, if we're also not putting attraction strategies in place to attract them into the profession and preparing them so that our retention strategies can work. So all three of these buckets are critically important, and I want you to make sure that you are addressing strategies under all three of these simultaneously. I also want you to encourage you to look at the needs from the three perspectives that are listed here. Our rural have a specific need, our urban have a specific need, and our suburban have a specific need. And we really need to take a look at those. I also want to encourage you to look at cross-stakeholder collaboration. This is an all hands on deck issue, and this isn't anything that just local special ed administrators are going to be able to address on their own, or building principals will be able to address on their own, or institutes of higher education. So I encourage you to pull all of your stakeholders to the table and really coalesce around this issue and look at what's working within your system that you would like to have stay the same, and maybe what isn't working that's going to require some level of revision, or completely starting all over again. So certainly take a look at that. So you need state leaders, you need district leaders, you need school leaders, teachers, counselors, the education prep programs who are our pre-service programs, teacher unions, parents and families. And this list certainly is not exhaustive, but those are some of the more critical stakeholders that really need to be at the table. And I want you to think about spending a little bit of time educating yourself around this process. And it's called Leading by Convening. It was an OSEP grant that came out to the National Association of State Directors of Special Education a number of years ago. It has not been in the forefront for around the last 7 years, and we're really resurrecting this process. And there's a link there that takes you to the documents and some modules that will really help you. But what it's doing is pulling all of the stakeholders that I just identified and having them coalesce around the issue of the educator shortage and what's happening in the urban need and the rural need and the urban need, and coming up with some collective ideas that you guys can move forward together. But it is really doing the work together. We can't work in silos. We can't work in isolation. And this process is really going to help you be able to pull those stakeholders together and coalesce around this issue and come up with some great recommendations. I also want to encourage you to go back and look at some policies. So those cross-stakeholder teams that I just identified, I think it's critically important that you sit down and you look at what are the state and the local policies that directly or indirectly impact the educator workforce. So for example, licensure, certifications and approval at the State Department. How are there barriers to your certification process or your licensure that are discouraging some of our young people to go into the profession, or even some of the career changers to consider coming into the profession? I mentioned a little bit earlier about the reciprocity criteria. Certainly take a look at any additional state rules, regulations, or standards that your legislators have put into place at the state level that could be barriers for you to be able to change the work around the educator shortage that limits the flexibility that you have to effectively address this or to think outside the box. And we do have to move past status quo. And the only way we're going to do that is doing a deep dive into the policies that could be prohibiting us from being able to make the right decisions on behalf of our children and to be able to change the system, and certainly how funding is allocated within your states. So diversifying the workforce. This is a critically important issue, and there's a lot of data around this that I did not build into the PowerPoint, but there certainly is a lot of data to support this issue. And we know that teachers of color close achievement gaps for students of color. They boost academic performance. They do increase graduation rates. They increase aspirations for our students of color to attend college. Teachers of color more frequently use culturally relevant instructional practices and greater likelihood to address racism and biases within their classrooms, which is huge, and it's an area that we need to be working on. Greater diversity of teachers may mitigate feelings of isolation, frustration, and fatigue, which support retentions of teachers of color. So providing them an opportunity to really work with some of their other peers. This one talks a little bit about some of the implicit biases that we also need to be cognizant of. And the teachers hold these, and how do we do some professional development around mitigating some of these issues as well. So we know that they provide less rigorous instruction for some of our children of color. They refer students less often to the gifted education. They write more discipline referrals. They have students who make smaller achievement gains. But we do know that Black teachers are more likely to rate Black students' behavior positively and academic achievement positively compared to the white teachers. And that Latino teachers are more likely to rate Latino students' behavior positively and academic achievements compared to the white teachers. And if you actually look at the discrepancy between the number of Latino teachers to the number of students, it's a little bit more overwhelming than even the percentage of Black teachers to our Black students. So here's some ideas. So what we need to do is we need to increase our career counseling to encourage our profession. We know that many of our current educators are discouraging students from going into education when they're counseling them on their career pathway. And we need to work with our high school counselors to really help elevate our profession and encourage more people to consider education as their primary profession in the future. To invest in teacher academies, dual enrollment options for high school students to acquire some of those early college credits and promote the teaching profession. This is great. I mean, the dual enrollment options should be there. It helps students expedite their time in the college program. It reduces their debt because those credits are paid for early within the high school program. And it gives them that early exposure to the teaching profession that we hope will hook them into continuing to finish their programming as well. And then following up with some tuition reimbursements. So students from low-income backgrounds who participate in dual enrollment have a higher first-year GPA than their peers. And again, it saves money and it shortens that degree time, which increases the likelihood of them retaining a degree. So I highly encourage you to go back, evaluate your dual enrollment program as an options that you have available, and certainly consider increasing some opportunities there. Support tutoring programs for students of color with younger children, including children with disabilities. Have diverse faculty from your institutes of higher ed campuses come in and speak to students and encourage them to enroll. Create stronger partnerships between your local education agencies and your education prep programs. Look at some alternative-based licensure structure. We know that's a problem. Look, and I brought up a minute ago, culturally, linguistically, and diverse hiring practices. Provide guidance on cultural competence and anti-bias training and resources. And then develop hiring and recruitment practices that are going to be positive for really recruiting people of color into the profession. So there's some options here with some affinity groups, and Lauren Scott, who works very closely with me within CEC around some of this, has a lot of information about the affinity groups, and I highly encourage you to take a look at some of that work as well. But it's pulling groups together and really helping to cultivate a diverse teacher workforce, providing them supports, providing them the resources that they need and the encouragement that they need to continue in the preparation programs so that they do increase our workforce. So some startup tips: identify those partnerships opportunities. Identify the gaps that you have within your own data with race, ethnicity, and gender. Work with your middle schools and high schools to recruit some candidates into the preparation programs. Look at the funding flexibilities that I talked about a little bit earlier to help support some of these activities. And then I highly encourage you to develop some guidance and resources and some tools so that your system has those available as you continue to work and move this work forward. So let's get into some attraction strategies. This is the primary one for me. I brought up about the negative media coverage as one of our challenges and barriers. And, we know today's times are difficult. The pandemic certainly exacerbated some negative coverage, accusing teachers of not being able to effectively meet the needs of all children, but particularly students with disabilities. Some of the safety issues, Michigan just experienced a shooting in school in Oxford. And we know, that those are not going to be positive reasons for our young children to come into the profession. So I encourage you to develop a strong media campaign within your local or your state or even your school. Look at some reward successes. How can you improve some of the morale by bringing the teachers and the special ed personnel's voices into some of the decision making and helping with some of the development of materials and resources, and certainly the dissemination of those. We have to transform our roles and responsibilities of educators today. They're very different than what they were in the past. And again, it's moving past that status quo, creating some opportunities for leadership, improve training for school leaders to effectively support teachers. You heard me talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. And professional development. I've got a whole spiel on professional development, but this is going to be a critical issue as well. But we have to elevate the profession. We've got to change the perception. We've got to change our messaging. And when we talk about elevating the profession, I want you to think about all of the educators that were listed in the definition in the early parts of the presentation. It's the teachers, it's the principals, it's the paraeducators, it's the instructional support personnel. So when we're talking about elevating the profession, it's all of our educators. It's not just our teachers. So please take that into consideration. Allocate some space on your website and celebrate your educators. Celebrate them at board meetings and district newsletters and local media. Encourage teachers to articulate the importance of their profession. Have some teachers and student parent testimonials that you're able to put out there. Certainly, an increase in compensation would also be helpful. Grow your own. I just want to speak very quickly on this. We have a lot of resources around some exemplar models that are grow your own that were identified not only in the OSEP briefs, but here are a few more that have been identified. In the grow your own programs, I'm looking at under two lenses. I'm looking at one, we have some very strong grow your own programs around paraeducators and taking our paraeducators and providing them opportunities to have the advanced education as well as the possibility of some scholarships or tuition reimbursement. So we're actually taking people that have the empathy, that understand the needs of our students with disabilities, that worked effectively with teachers and parents, and really encouraging them to come into the profession, as well as grow your own for the middle school and high school students, and particularly targeting those students of color to try and diversify the profession. I encourage you to take a look at some of the links here. These are active links that will take you to some of these models and give you a little bit more information. And then the webinar series that CEC is going to put on within the next couple of months will also teach you how to design and develop and implement your own, grow your own programs within your system. Alternative routes to certification is another option that is certainly available. And these are taking people that have bachelor's degree that are interested in going back for a second career. And how do we kind of expedite some of their training opportunities, giving them an opportunity to be in the position and then pursuing their degree at the same time. And we have many places that are actually paying for people to go through their alternative certification routes, again, to increase our pipeline. So every state has authorized an alternative route to certification. 20% of new educators enter through alternative routes. So again, this is an area that I highly encourage you to look at. It'll be another area that'll be highlighted in our webinar series. But alternative routes have the largest impact on diversification than any other attraction strategy. And educators of color are twice as likely to enter the field of education through an alternative pathway. It's a very effective strategy. Go to your state department, go to their state website, find out what your alternative route to certification option is within your district, familiarize with that yourself with that, so you can encourage people to take advantage of that offering. So some startup tips include comprehensive coursework. We have to have strong mentorship. We have to have a strong induction program as well. It should include some regular observations, some ongoing support. Look at what funding flexibilities that you have in place. You need to market and advertise this option. I was in a state recently talking about the educator shortage issue, and I mentioned this, and the State Department said, well, we have all of this in place. I had over 200 administrators in the room that really were not familiar that the state even had that as an option. So we've got to make sure that we're communicating effectively. We're advertising the options that are available, and we're encouraging people to take advantage of those. And again, looking at some of the guidance and resources that we have. Preparation. When I look at the preparation as part of our attract, prepare, and retain, we're looking at it under two lenses. We're looking at it under the pre-service preparation, which is our educator preparation programs. And then we're also looking at it as the professional learning opportunities, the professional development that the local school districts or the state departments of education will be responsible for once they leave the pre-service programs and come into the locals. So let's talk a little bit about this. Although most educators receive professional development today, too often they're not consulted on, regarding content, methods, and the delivery of the professional development. And it's not necessarily meeting the students' needs. So please survey your educators to see what supports are needed. Most importantly, I would hope that you would focus in on content. We know that if our teachers are knowledgeable about the content, that it does increase the academic outcomes for all of our children, but particularly our children with disabilities. So we have to make sure that our special educators have that content knowledge so that they can design and deliver the specially designed instruction that is needed for our children. We need to focus on good induction and mentoring models to meet the identified areas as well. And we're making a recommendation that we would love the state departments of education in collaboration with the local education agencies to take the lead in developing a statewide induction and mentoring model so that there's consistency across the board, there's accountability that's in place, and there's funding that's allocated and professional development that's allocated very intentionally to make a difference around this particular piece. I think it's important that when we look at mentors, many of our early career people have mentors that are assigned to them coming into their first couple of years into the profession. Oftentimes those are on paper, not necessarily with intentionality to really make good connections. But we need to assign mentors to all new special education personnel. And this goes back to my definition of educators. It's the teachers, it's the paraeducators, it's the specialized instructional support personnel. I'm going to overemphasize that fourth bullet, and that's the long-term substitutes. I had a policy intern from the University of Virginia Commonwealth that worked with me. She's working on her doctoral degree. And as part of her doctoral program, she had to teach in the pre-service program. So she was teaching basic reading as part of the required program. And she was telling me that she had a substitute teacher, a long-term substitute teacher that spent the entire last school year as a special education substitute and did not have a clue how to teach reading. So we had a year's loss of instruction for the students on that particular caseload. So please make sure that you're prioritizing really strong professional development for your long-term subs. We've got to make sure that they have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to be able to work effectively and meet those unique and individual needs of all of our children, but particularly our students with disabilities. I can't overemphasize the importance of working with those long-term substitutes by providing professional development for them. It's also a preparation as well as an attraction strategy. Maybe they would be interested in enrolling in a pre-service program, or it's a retention strategy to at least retain them until we're able to fill the position with a qualified personnel. So we've got to make sure that our mentors are well trained and they have the knowledge and skills to be able to do a good job with their mentorship. We need to incentivize mentors with some compensation or a stipend, and then that ongoing professional learning opportunity. We need to encourage collaboration with multiple stakeholders. We need to make sure that special education teachers also have content mentorship from general education teachers, not just the mentorship around the compliance and the IEP and Medicaid reporting, and really focusing on the early and new career personnel, making sure that they have the adequate resources. So again, training the mentors to be able to do observations and give feedback. Matching the mentors is going to be critically important. Have very clear expectations for what the mentors need to be doing and the time that needs to be spent. Making sure that the principals and administrators can observe and give feedback. Make sure there's adequate time allocated. And again, are you putting this in writing that you've got some good guidance and resources and tools that mentors would be able to use? So I recommend that you convene your administrators, your instructional coaches, your LA personnel, teacher leaders, to collaboratively align school-wide professional development with ongoing professional learning opportunities. There's money there. You heard me say in the early part of all of the funding that's available. Funding can be spent on personnel as well as professional development. And we've got to, with intentionality, allocate it towards some very intentional, targeted professional learning opportunities so that our everyone that's in front of our children with disabilities have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to deliver that specially designed instruction. Again, taking a look at some specific monitoring around culturally competent peer support mentoring models as well, really looking at focusing in on equity and cultural needs of our educators of color is an additional issue that I encourage you to take a look at. So let's talk about inclusive leadership. Part of the working conditions data that's come back tells us that many of the people are leaving because they don't feel that they necessarily have administrative support. And we know that strong principals are the key drivers to retain education professionals. And we've got to work to ensure that they focus their time and mentorship and collaborative opportunities to meet the needs. And so how are you working within your systems to ensure that you have a principal pipeline as well, but that you also have professional development opportunities for your leadership? And how are your local your LEA special ed administrators and your building principals collaborating on meeting the needs of our teachers, all teachers, that are putting in a positive culture in place and are addressing the working conditions, again, that are causing the high attrition rates that we're currently experiencing. So we look at leadership development, again, designing and deliver some intentional professional learning opportunities, looking at school culture, looking at instructional leadership, helping them understand how to analyze the data, helping to facilitate the change by using that data, and providing mentors to new administrators so that they do have people there that are helping them make the right decisions in moving the work forward. So again, when we're looking at ongoing professional learning opportunities, I highly encourage you to look at professional development to reduce some of the turnover. It's going to increase some job satisfaction. They're going to feel more support from administrators. It's going to help fill some of that gap between pre-service and then coming into the in-service aspect of it. And we have to provide some practice-based opportunities, not just the content information, but opportunities to practice that. So there's some startup tips that are listed here. I'm not going to go through those just due to time, but I highly, highly encourage you to look at the professional learning opportunities and tailor those very specifically to the novice, to the mid-career, and to the veteran. It's not a one-size-fits-all model. It's not, we don't want to do spray and praise. We don't want to spray information to everybody and then pray people do something with it when they're done. We need to be very intentional with that, and we need to be very targeted to make sure that each one of our groups have the resources that they need. A couple of resources that I just want to highlight as part of those professional development is we do have the Jumpstart program with CEC. It's geared toward early career and the new. I highly encourage you to take a look at our website and take a look at that piece of it. We also created a new membership category for paraeducators. We had heard through surveys that teachers, especially teachers, really didn't know how to effectively work with their paraeducators. And this is a series that we also, a webinar series on demand or asynchronous that we also have available that will help the special ed teachers, particularly in our low incident population, or working with behaviors or working with instruction, to be helping to understand the roles and responsibilities of educators and effectively assign them to particular responsibilities. So please take a look at that as well. Some future PD that's going to be coming up. We have a webinar series for paraeducators on the high leverage practices. And those are broken down into assessment, instructions, social, emotional, behavioral, and collaborative. It's going to be free, will be available to all paraeducators across the nation. Right now, our national data tells us that we have more paraeducators than we have special ed teachers in the nation. We're losing them as fast as we're losing our special education teachers, or even at a higher rate. So this webinar series will make sure that you get all of the information. It's a strategy for induction, for mentoring, for preparation, for retention, for all of the above. We're really excited about this forthcoming. So look for that this spring. I also want to encourage you to take a look at high leverage practices in special education. Those are the ones that I just listed here: the assessment, the instruction, the social, emotional, behavioral, and the collaborative. Some phenomenal trainings regarding this. This is a good one to look at system reform, having real consistency within your system. It's very helpful for administrators also. It's very helpful for mentors to understand how to support their mentees in relationship to assessment, instruction, and the behavior. We also have the Cedar Center, and we're CEC's in a real collaboration with them around educator development. And their mission is to help also look at some of the evidence-based practices in the multi-tiered system of support that's available. So I highly encourage you to take a look at the Cedar Center as well. Then there's the Iris Center. The Iris Center, this is one I really want to encourage you to. I can't spend much time on it, but I could do a whole webinar just around the Iris Center. It's an OSEP funded center, but they have modules specifically on teacher retention for special educators. And they have micro-credentialing that's available. It is an exemplar model of professional development and resources that are wonderful. And I have a link here for you to go in and take a look at the teacher retention, reducing the attraction of special educators. This comes out of the Vanderbilt University. Great work. There's opportunities for professional development already built in for you. There's modules for building principles that are inclusive in there, helping them understand the IEP process. It's building that inclusive leadership as well. So please take a look at the Iris Center for some additional resources. I want to move now into the few minutes that I have left talking about the importance of program evaluation. I threw out a lot of different types of models for you to consider, and that's only a handful in relationship to all of them that are available. And hopefully have another opportunity to share more. The webinar series that CEC will be putting out will certainly get to that. But it's very important that you have a program evaluation of assessing the implementation of your innovative practices. You have to be able to have data to show a return on investment. So when I talked about the federal funding flexibilities at the very beginning, and if we're using the American Recovery dollars, or we're using IDA dollars, or we're using Title II dollars, any of those ESSER dollars, we can't keep going back to Congress every year and say, we need more money, we need more money, we need more money, when 260 billion was allocated in the last year or so toward helping us build this sustainable system of support. We have to collect data to say, this is how we've used the funds that you have provided. This is the impact that it's had on our system, but we do need additional funding for sustainability of these innovative practices that we're putting in place. So I think it's important that you look at how are you evaluating your program. So you've got to design it. You've got to look at, where you've got some challenges. You've got to pull your stakeholders together. I'm going to go into this in a minute. So the program design and the purpose and the objectives, so that you can evaluate the program's actual implementation. You have that documentation that tells you. You have to have an evaluation plan in place from the beginning with very clear requirements for documentation that can help ensure that the needed information is actually collected, analyzed, and used to make future decisions. So here's some questions. That's just a little bit of a chart. I'm not going to spend time on it because I hope to answer a few of your questions yet. But please take a look at this and see how you can do that. The IDC, it's another OSEP funded center, also has an evaluation system in place about how you evaluate some of your innovative practices. So I take a look at that. So it's critical you evaluate the programs, certainly that rely on any of the grant funding, and make sure that you have the data that you need to tell the story. So I'd like you to also do some action planning as a result of some of the information that you heard here today. To be able to stabilize the workforce, we have to listen to and empower our educators, and we have to make some changes. We know that navigating through adversity is a challenge, but there's opportunity to reset our approaches to the educator workforce. It begins with planning, leadership at the state level, the district level, school level. We can chart a new course that will improve education for both students and teachers by intentionally increasing an effective and diverse pipeline and creating the conditions that help our educators enter and remain in the classroom in order to effectively address the unique needs of students. This is a little chart that can help you with some of the action planning. So when you leave this webinar, I hope that you go back and think of what are some strategies that you need to put in place? What are some next steps? Who needs to be at the table? How are you going to measure that? What's the time frame in which you can look at some implementation? What are the resources that you need? If you need resources, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to share information with you. And I'm going to leave you with this note. This is a part of the old rethink process. I highly encourage you to ask these two questions when you're evaluating your system around the educator shortage. What are we currently doing that's getting the results and the outcomes that we're working toward? And if it's working, you put it in a bucket and you keep it moving forward. The second question is, what are we currently doing that's not getting the results and the outcomes that we want, or is needed to make the change? And then what do we need to do different? Do we modify it? Do we amend it? Do we just blow it up and start all over again? But by asking those two questions around what is your system doing with the educator shortage issue will help you in developing that action plan to be able to move forward. So I know that we're out of time. I've just got a couple minutes left and I'm going to move quickly through this. CEC in collaboration with the Cedar Center is in the process of designing and developing a 12-part webinar series around the educator shortage. So this is where we're moving from information to implementation. We're saturated with information. We know we've got research, we've got surveys, we've got testimonials, we've got data, but now we've got to move into the action planning, the implementation of these exemplar models, of these evidence-based practices that are going to make a difference in our system. So we've got about 12 national organizations that are at the table, including a couple from the U.S. Department of Education, but many of our peer groups, CASE, NASD, the Learning Policy Institute, AACTE. I could go on for a really long time, tell you who they all are. But we have gotten together, we've identified the topical areas under the exemplar models. We're going to be addressing the induction and mentoring. We're going to do the grow your own. We're going to be doing teacher residency. We're going to be doing working conditions, inclusive leadership. We're many more. And we're very last one will be, how are you going to evaluate these innovative practices that you're putting into place? And we will have lots of resources available. Our projected timeline with this is we're hoping to be able to roll this out live and recorded so that you will have a 12-part webinar series that will be your peers training you on how to design and implement and evaluate effective models that are going to help you move from information to implementation. It's going to help you build that sustainable system of support that will effectively meet all of our children across the nation, but particularly our students with disabilities. So Jeremy, I think I have a few minutes left if there's any questions in the chat. I know I talked fast, but I'd love an opportunity to see if there's any questions.
Hey, it's a good thing it's recorded, right? We can go back and we can rewatch it. No, this has been really good. We've had a few questions that I think will wrap us up nicely. I'm going to start with the one that's relevant here at the end. We have a question about where can we find information about the webinars you're referencing, Laurie?
Okay, it's a great question. It's on the CEC website. So if you go to the Council for Exceptional Children, there will be links under professional development, and there will be lots of links there. There's certainly advantages to membership because we've got many of our professional development opportunities that are also free that are part of our learning library for even more access. But CEC is very committed to not only putting out some that there would have some kind of a cost to it, but you have funding options to certainly do some purchase, but many that will be free. The paraeducator one's free, the educator shortage is free. We are very committed to making sure that we're getting information into the hands of the people that have a need to know to build the capacity that needs to take place. So the CEC website would be one. For some of the exemplar models, the Ideas That Work website under OSEP with the U.S. Department of Education, if you click on their educator shortage, there will be lots of resources that are available. They've got 13 briefs that identify exemplar models across the nation in all of the topical areas that I covered today and more that we will be reviewing on the website as well. They also identify other state activities and innovative practices that are taking place. And I would highly recommend you go there for additional resources. And please go back to the Cedar Center. Great Teacher, Great Leader site has a lot of great resources as well. The Irish Center for some of those modules. But I'd be happy to put together a list of resources, Jeremy, and provide that to you guys as well.
I think that would be great. I have been gathering some of the links and put them in the chat for all of you. And then I'm just about to grab the Cedar Center link and put it right here in the chat as well. So George, I know you're on here. Maybe what you could do is collate those links and include them in the follow-up, if you wouldn't mind. All right, let's go to the next question. And so the next question is related to the substitute teachers and how to use substitute teachers. So I'll just read it and stay with me here. This is related to Michigan. So some Michigan retirees being able to substitute if they're hired through a third party. If I understand this issue, this is not the case right now. Retirees must be hired directly by an LEA. So the question is more around, can an LEA hire, do retirees have to be hired directly by the LEA or third party to substitute? So this person also comments that the Michigan governor has proposed giving teachers money at the beginning of the year for those that have stayed. Do you know, does that mean also social workers, speech language pathologists, OTs, PTs, etc.?
Great. I have a lot of Michigan specific data and information. I have been working with them a little bit, but not all of that. But they are lifting some of the requirements that have been in place in regards to hiring back. So we have critical shortage areas. as special education teachers, certainly one of those. And so many of the states have lifted some of their requirements to allow greater opportunity to bring in retirees back into the profession without it impacting their retirement. So before they would have to be hired through a third party because they couldn't be rehired back into the state's retirement system without it impacting their retirement. So that's where the third party piece came in. But many of the states have put waivers in place for some of those restrictions. So I would encourage all of you to check with your state departments of education as to what waivers they put in place, what models they have in place, whether it's around the alternative certification piece of it. New Mexico just legislatively passed a bill, 20% increase in salary for their special education teachers and special ed personnel. There's a lot of things taking place out there. Not all that information is necessarily getting disseminated from the departments of education. So I highly encourage you to check with your departments of education to see where they have put flexibilities in place as those temporary mandates I talked about at the beginning of the presentation, which are going to help us to be able to move the needle forward, but they're not going to be sustainable over time. But please check with your state departments for clarification on any waivers that they have put in place around any of their rules and regulations that provide greater flexibility.
That's great. Thank you for that. The last one that we have is when you mentioned pay being the last barrier. So early in the presentation, you talk about how satisfaction and other practices are a big reason for educators leaving the field. Was the pay barrier in regards to paraeducators, certified staff, or both?
Well, I think the pay barrier is for all.
Okay.
Right now, we know that there's significant issues around paraeducators, being paid a very small amount of money, a minimum wage type. Many are not receiving benefits. That's a huge concern. We have some states that the entry level starting salary for a teacher is $45,000. And if you have a family, you're eligible for food stamps and a poverty level. So, educators across the board, I think that needs to be taken a look at. And there are some articles out, and there certainly are some states that are taking a look at some tiered levels. Pay increase if you're, early career, if you're in the profession for, 5 to 10 years, you get a little bit more of a bump. If you've got some longevity, it's an incentive to stay, not be part of that attrition that's leaving or those early retirees. Different pay scales for those that have the master's degree, which is already there, but even elevating that a little bit. So many of our states are looking at some tiered funding options, to put in place to increase that. But what we're hearing from the field is, as important as the pay is, if they're going into a building that has poor working conditions and a poor working culture, and there's lack of administrative support, and there's lack of, leadership opportunities to elevate themselves, and there's lack of professional development to, increase their knowledge, skills, and abilities, they're not going to stay no matter how much they're being paid. So to remediate the working conditions, the dissatisfaction piece, at the same time, we're looking at how are we increasing salary as an incentive to attract more in, but also as a incentive to retain those that are continuing to make a commitment to the field.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Laurie.